Isle of Dogs is a stop-motion animated film directed by Wes Anderson. Its plot takes place 20 years in the future in the fictional city of Megasaki with the looming threat of a canine virus, the dog flu, that is threatening to transmit itself to humans and cause mass contamination. So the mayor of that city proposes a legislation that is then adopted to deport all of the animals onto an island called Trash Island. Trash Island is, as its name suggests, this giant landfill across the ocean or across the river from Megasaki, where the city dumps its garbage and as a result will also dump all the dogs from the city. Fast forward 6 months into the future and Trash Island is overrun by packs of dogs who are fighting for scraps, for survival, in the most Wes Anderson-y way possible, where they take a vote on whether or not it's worth it to fight for these maggot-infested garbage bags full of food, and as it turns out, it's actually totally worth it. And that's how we're introduced to our main pack of dogs, a group of 5 dogs that rescue a young boy, a young pilot, who crash-landed onto Trash Island to try and find his dog called Spots. And from then on, we get a very classic adventure film of a boy and his dog, a boy and his dogs, in this case, venturing across the island trying to find this boy's dog and also his long-lost friend, of course. Now, I loved Isle of Dogs. I thought it was a beautiful, fantastic little movie, and I was extremely surprised at how emotionally resonant it was for me, considering I'm not a dog person at all. I should be on the side of all these corrupt Megasaki politicians stroking their evil pussies. But no, I was very much impressed at how much of an emotional punch Wes Anderson films packs. That emotion really is the key to the film, and the key to a lot of Wes Anderson's films in general. I find that when I'm invested emotionally and when I'm really drawn into the story, then all of his mannerisms and takes really work with the film and not against it. But on the contrary, when that doesn't work for me, for example, Grand Budapest Hotel, which I haven't seen since the theater, so I'd be fully willing to give it another shot, I was really pulled out of that film, and all of a sudden, all the mannerisms and all the Wes Anderson style that was so present throughout that film really sort of irritated me more than anything else. But when you consider how Anderson shoots his films, when you consider his style, his precision, his mannerisms, the attention to detail that is put within every single frame of his movies, I often say that he is like an OCD child playing with his toys. That style really works perfectly with the genre of stop-motion animation, and sometimes it feels like his live-action films are just animated films with real actors. So just as with Fantastic Mr. Fox, his visual style really meshes so beautifully with the genre that he is directing. And the animation in this film is absolutely beautiful. It manages to merge some incredibly impressive and smooth camera work with a more jittery, more scrappy feel to the character animation and to the character movement. You really feel like there's no post-processing going on there to sort of smooth out the character animation. It feels, and I'm no expert in animation, so feel free to correct me, but it looks like they did that classic, you animate every other frame, so when you're shooting 24 frames, you only animate 12 frames a second, and that gives that wonderful sort of homemade, artisanal, organic feel to the film. I think that with stop motion, because you have these real, tangible objects in front of the screen, and because you're still tethered to a real camera, everything just has this more grounded, real, human feel to it. Certainly more than with 3D animation, and I'd argue even more than with some live-action films that rely on heavy green screen or heavy VFX work. And that simple, grounded human feel merges so beautifully with the simple, grounded, true story. I mean true in the sense that it feels true, obviously, that Anderson is telling in Isle of Dogs. I mean, on the surface, it's a very simple yet very effective story of a boy searching for his long-lost dog. And that simple, basic story is handled extremely well, and surrounding or enriching that are some more profound political elements and themes, whether you consider them to be about animal cruelty, whether it be how we treat disenfranchised or marginalized people within society, whether it be about immigration or like the migrant crisis. I certainly sort of viewed it from that angle. Just the idea of seeing this displaced population thrown out to the edges of society by fear of being contaminated with diseases, which is like a very common talking point by a lot of alt-right groups in Europe especially. And it even dives down into some really dark stuff, such as by the end of the film, all the dogs are rounded up in these internment camps, and there's also this looming threat of mass genocide. So the film is PG-13, it's certainly not for toddlers, and it definitely tackles some heavier themes, and it certainly has some weight and some gravitas behind it. I'd also like to take this opportunity to talk about the score of the film that is composed by Alexandre Desplat, who just won an Oscar for The Shape of Water, which is a score that I really loathed. I couldn't stand it. It sounded like some dude in the subway around Montmartre playing the accordion for tourists. I really disliked it quite a bit, and with this, I mean, he has won me over, or he's won me back, or whatever, because it's all based around these Japanese drums, these percussive instruments throughout the entirety of the film, and it meshes so beautifully with the style and the themes and the setting to a point where sometimes you don't notice it, and when the score starts getting, you know, louder and more noticeable, it is just incredibly energizing and rhythms the film in such a perfect way. It really is the perfect score for this film, and I think that the collaboration between Desplat and Anderson they've collaborated before, but this one in particular is probably one of their strongest collaborations. Now, the film has had some controversies surrounding it. The cultural appropriation word has been thrown around a bit, which is a very, very bad word. That's not really something that I worry about too much. For me, all art is appropriation in one way or another. It exists because people, I mean, it doesn't really ever exist in a vacuum. People like something and they sort of steal from it and elaborate on that, and then other people will take that inspiration and do things with it. And I feel that if you start to legislate or police what people can and can't do and when, I think we're really going to stifle ourselves creatively in a really obnoxious way. What I'm far more concerned about, rather than appropriation, is more representation, the representation of other cultures on screen and how you represent the others. And in that sense, one of the criticisms that has been laid onto this film has been in the fact that all the Japanese characters speak Japanese, which seems good enough, but they're not subtitled. And what that does is, because all the animals speak English, which is like a conceit of any animated films with animals, and the translator, you have a translator character for certain scenes, played by Frances McDormand. There's also a heavy reliance for the plot to move forward on an American exchange student voiced by Greta Gerwig. And some people have said that what that does is that transforms Japanese people into the others in their own country. And I can certainly listen to that argument. It's a fair criticism to lay on the film, why not? But then, like, what is the solution? So I heard Justin Chang, who is a film critic for the LA Times, who said that, well, maybe it would have been better off had the Japanese characters just spoken English. And first of all, I'm not sure that I would have preferred that. I'm really certain that that would have opened up the film to just as much, if not worse, criticisms People would have said that he's imposing his language onto another people and basically denigrating their language and their culture. So I don't think that would fly at all. And then the other thing is, maybe he should have had subtitles. When you spend 4 years of your life animating a film and animating every frame to perfection, and there are so many details layered everywhere in the image, I can certainly understand Anderson wanting people to look at the screen and everywhere across the screen and not down reading subtitles. I'm guessing that, you know, when you spend that much time and effort and your team has spent that much time animating a film, it maybe is infuriating if people aren't paying attention to what's going on screen, but actually just reading what the words of what people are saying. That being said, that's kind of short-sighted in the sense that, you know, across other markets, yeah, there'll be dubbed versions, but there will also be subtitled versions. So, for example, if I was to go to France and see this movie, I wouldn't want to see a dubbed French version. I'd want to see the original film with the original voice cast. And so all the English-speaking characters would be subtitled. The Japanese characters seemingly wouldn't. And Anderson says that you can kind of understand what they're saying even if you don't understand the words because of the intonation, and that's true. But, you know, while that didn't bother me at all, maybe he should have just bitten the bullet and subtitled the Japanese characters. And some people have maybe even said that, you know, the film maybe shouldn't have even been in Japan. It has no reason really to be set in Japan, seeing as it's not based on any sort of Japanese culture or lore. It's an original story. And that seems very harsh. I don't think we should be telling Wes Anderson where he can and cannot set his films. His films obviously don't ever really take place in the real world anyway. They take place in this fantasy Wes Anderson world, apart from maybe some hipsters that act and dress like they're in a Wes Anderson film. But those people are assholes and deserve absolutely no respect. Top of that argument, I don't even think, for me, the film even took place in Japan. Like, it didn't feel like a movie that was made by somebody who had lived in Japan. It felt like a film made by somebody who had watched a lot of Japanese films. Like, that's really where the movie's set, much in the way that a Tarantino sets all his films in, like, a film world, not the real world. And I don't know, there was just so many elements of the movie that came across as homages to Kurosawa, whether it be some of the framing and the way he would put multiple characters within the same frame, the use of wind, especially in the Trash Island portions of the film. All that felt very Kurosawa. The story felt like it could be from a Miyazaki film, even though he would have told it in a very different way, but it felt like something that he could have tackled. There are two characters in there. The two sort of political candidates are called Kobayashi and Watanabe, which I took as sort of, again, a little Easter egg for Masaki Kobayashi, who's a great Japanese director, made some tremendous samurai films, his masterpiece probably being Harakiri. And for Watanabe, I was like, oh, that's maybe like an homage to Shinichiro Watanabe, the anime director who made Cowboy Bebop and did a bunch of other stuff. I even saw like little elements of Seijun Suzuki in there. I mean, both him and Wes Anderson love a sideways dolly. I mean, they absolutely love that. But even throughout the film, there are, in terms of the use of color, but also in the light shifts, what Suzuki will do is that within the same frame, without cutting, you'll have light shifts, so the characters will move around and the light will change within that shot pretty dramatically and pretty noticeably, and Anderson does the exact same thing several times. That really struck me, almost like you would if you were putting on a play. And through some of the research that I did, I was just looking for some elements that maybe confirmed this hypothesis, and I came across this concept that's very used across anime called nakama. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but what it is this idea of the people you have around you, of the friends you have around you, and that's pretty important in anime from what little research I've done. And in an RPG, interestingly enough, your party of characters that you have around you is called a nakama, or again, I'm not sure how you say it, but that got me thinking, like, that got me to some weird place, like, oh yeah, it's true that if you think about it, it's like a quest mission, and you have your main character, and then surrounding him you have your party who all have these different personalities and these different skills, and then it got me on this weird tangent of thinking, wow, that felt sort of like Persona 4 in some ways, even in some visual cues. I was like, hey, is that an homage to Persona 4? And maybe that's just me obsessing about Persona 4, and that's the only sort of cultural insight I have on Japan is through films and Persona 4. And that's maybe my own limits when it comes to analyzing something like this. And so while none of these criticisms that bothered me throughout the film, because I was just smiling from ear to ear throughout, I would certainly listen to somebody from Japan who had some issues with how Japan or how the Japanese were portrayed. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't, because I shit on American films for how they portray France and Paris and French people all the time. For me, it just really depends on the film, it depends on the filmmaker, it depends on the intent of the film and the sort of perceived intention of the filmmaker. So, like the Woody Allen films bother me a lot. I fucking hate them, even though Woody Allen's a director that I quite like most of the time. And yet, you know, Ratatouille, I'm fine with it. I don't know, maybe I'm just a hypocrite. But as it stands, Isle of Dogs is easily one of my favorite films of the year so far. It is beautiful. It is just a joy, a delight. Thinking about Wes Anderson in the same way that Lynch, there are all these imitators, all these people that are copycats or that are influenced clearly by these filmmakers, that have films that are reminiscent of these filmmakers, yet somehow their films still feel incredibly unique, and nobody is quite able to make a film like them. There's this magic to the formula that hasn't been broken yet, and it's just wonderful to have these singular voices still working in cinema today, and we're really just very lucky to have these guys. So yeah, there you have it. I love Isle of Dogs. So as always, guys, if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so, liking the video if you want, and if you hit the bell, you can be notified immediately as soon as there's a new video that's up. And, you know, thanks for watching as always, and until then, see you next time.